Media clamored for information about her. Any new photo, a big paycheck. And soon, Pippa became the paparazzi's biggest prize.
At 41, Pippa Middleton is no longer hiding behind carefully posed photos or polished public appearances. For the first time since her sudden fame, she's letting the cracks in the fairy tale show.
Has it changed your relationship?
It's hard sometimes because I have felt publicly bullied a little bit just by, when I read things.
Had a hard time with that?
It's been a bit difficult, yeah.
And the reason behind her quiet split from James Matthews? It's not what anyone expected. For years, Pippa was the definition of grace under pressure. The woman who walked beside royalty, smiled for the cameras, and made it all look effortless. From the viral white dress moment at her sister's wedding that catapulted her to the mainstream to the luxury lifestyle she appeared to lead, everything about her screamed perfection. But behind closed doors, things were unraveling. The truth is, Pippa was living in two worlds. In one, she was the society icon.
Really careful.
The sister of the Princess of Wales, and the wife of a wealthy hedge fund manager. In the other, she was just a woman who quietly lost herself in a marriage that looked perfect until it wasn't. And now, the silence has finally been broken. The thing about silence is that it doesn't always mean peace. As the years passed, the woman who once stood so confidently beside royalty began disappearing from view. No scandals, no statements, just a slow, graceful fade from the spotlight. Until now, Pippa had been under serious pressure to be the perfect woman in the public eye for years. She's been through her fair share of dragging the few times she slipped up. But now, at 41, she's decided to switch things up. Even though she didn't release a tell-all or have a sit-down for a primetime interview, what she did was enough to tell us everything about her big decision to stand tall. This is the story behind that decision, and the real reason why Pippa Middleton walked away from the life she spent years trying to make work.
There is, a lot of the pressure I get in London, just my day-to-day routine. Occasionally I might get followed by paparazzi and...
Have you had a hard time with that?
It's been a bit difficult, yeah.
Before the paparazzi, before the palace connections, before the internet turned her into a viral fashion icon, Pippa Middleton was simply the spirited middle child from Bucklebury, a small village in Berkshire, England. Born in 1983 to Michael and Carol Middleton, Pippa's childhood was far from glamorous. But it was rich in something even more important: ambition. Her father had once worked as a flight dispatcher, her mother as a flight attendant. Together, they built a successful party supply business, Party Pieces, that provided their children with private schooling and a stable life. But even at that, they were far from aristocrats. Contrary to public assumptions, the Middleton sisters weren't born into royalty or extreme wealth. They were raised in a family that valued manners, education, and self-made success. While Catherine, now Princess of Wales, was polished and reserved, Pippa had a spark of her own. Confident, social, and naturally magnetic, she was never content to just blend in. Friends from childhood describe her as sharp, driven, and just a bit cheekier than her big sister. Even then, it was clear. Pippa was going to make her own mark on the world, even if she didn't know how yet. She excelled academically, attending Marlborough College, one of the UK's top private schools, before studying English literature at the University of Edinburgh. There, she built a life of her own, cultivating friendships, social capital, and connections that would later pull her into the spotlight in ways no one could have predicted. But here's the thing most people forget. Before the headlines, Pippa Middleton wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't posing for magazines or attending red carpet events. She was building a career in PR and event planning and living a relatively normal London life. That is, until everything changed. In just one day, her life would be flipped upside down by a dress, a walk down the aisle, and the eyes of the entire world.
It's getting used to sort of not being entirely private and sort of feeling wherever I go, maybe someone will spot me, and, you know, for good or bad, it just means that I don't entirely relax.
It was May 2011 at Westminster Abbey. The world tuned in to witness the royal wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton, a true fairy tale moment. But as Kate stepped out of the royal car, glowing in her Alexander McQueen gown, all eyes shifted just slightly to the woman standing behind her. And that woman was the one and only Pippa. The bride's sister was wearing a sleek, understated white dress that was meant to blend in, not stand out. But still, she unintentionally stole the show. The silhouette she was rocking was elegant, modest, and to be honest, timeless. It hugged her figure just enough to send fashion blogs, tabloids, and gossip sites into a frenzy. The internet dubbed her royal hotness. In a matter of hours, Pippa Middleton, once known only to insiders as Kate's sister, was catapulted to international fame. That one walk behind her sister down the aisle changed everything. The dress became one of the most searched fashion items of the year. Designers flooded media outlets, crediting her with reviving minimalist bridesmaid fashion. Meme pages exploded. The press followed her every move. Suddenly, she was no longer a woman living her own life. She was a symbol, a brand, a newly found tabloid obsession. And the strangest part of it all? It wasn't even remotely on her bucket list to become famous. She hadn't even said a word to anyone. She didn't dance, give an interview, or try to outshine the bride at the wedding. She simply showed up, and the world decided it was her moment to shine. From that day forward, Pippa's life would never return to normal. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment. Journalists dug through her university days. Photos of her going to the gym or walking her dog were treated like major scoops. Everything became public property. Her friendships, her fashion, her body, even her facial expressions. And yet, through it all, Pippa stayed composed. She never lashed out or crumbled under pressure. But behind the calm exterior, a storm was brewing. Because the truth was, Pippa didn't sign up for this. She wasn't royalty. She didn't have a palace or a press team to shield her. She had to learn how to navigate sudden fame in real time, under a microscope, with the whole world watching. And fame, especially the kind you never asked for, comes at a cost.
It's hard sometimes because I sort of, I have felt sort of publicly bullied a little bit. It's quite difficult because effectively I'm just paving my way and trying to live a life like any 30-year-old.
As the spotlight burnt hotter, so did the media's obsession with Pippa's love life. Every man she was seen with became a hot topic for the tabloids. Every stroll down the street was spun into engagement rumors. And for a woman who never chased or yearned for the celebrity life, this kind of constant surveillance became its own quiet torment. Her relationship with Alex Loudon, a former cricketer turned businessman, was one of her earliest high-profile romances. By all accounts, he was the safe choice. British, grounded, and from a well-connected family, Alex offered a sense of normalcy. But the attention became too much. Their walks together became headline photos. Any kind of public conversation was snapped from across the street and spun into something it wasn't. Even vacations were interrupted by lenses hiding in the bushes. Eventually, the pressure got to them. Alex reportedly struggled with how public Pippa's life had become. and their once private love story quietly dissolved. Then came Nico Jackson. Young, flashy, and confident, he was a stockbroker with a jet-set lifestyle. They looked like a modern power couple, traveling, attending society events, and projecting an image of effortless wealth and fun. But even Nico, who seemed more comfortable in the spotlight, wasn't enough to balance the weight of constant exposure. The relationship fizzled out quietly, just like the last. Each breakup taught Pippa something new, but also left a familiar echo. Fame doesn't mix well with peace. That's when James Matthews entered the picture. Or should we say, he has always been in the picture, but initially just as a friend. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't chasing the limelight. In fact, he actively avoided it. A former race car driver turned hedge fund manager, James was wealthy, successful, and, most importantly, private. The son of self-made millionaire parents, he came from privilege, but carried himself with quiet restraint. They met in St. Bart's, where James's family owns a luxury resort, and their relationship was slow and deliberate. He didn't seem rattled by the press. He didn't care for red carpets. And for Pippa, after years of having her dating life picked apart by strangers, that steadiness was a kind of sanctuary. To the outside world, it looked like Pippa had finally found the one. A man with enough power and money to stand beside her, but enough self-assurance to stay out of her way. Someone who wouldn't compete for her spotlight, but wouldn't run from it either. The perfect partner the media would gobble up. But as we're about to see, choosing peace isn't the same as living in it. And for all their surface compatibility, James and Pippa were walking into a marriage built on two very different definitions of normal.
The nature of Twitter and Facebook, people, even if they spot me, will just say they've just seen me somewhere, and particularly in a restaurant, that sort of could be the worst, because if someone tweets in a restaurant, then a photographer could turn up at the restaurant.
Right.
When Pippa Middleton and James Matthews finally went public with their relationship in 2016, the media unsurprisingly pounced on the news. After years of failed relationships and relentless tabloid scrutiny, Pippa seemed to have finally found her match. A man who was wealthy, reserved, and far from thirsty for fame. The narrative practically wrote itself. Britain's most eligible woman was finally off the market. A year later, they were married. The ceremony, held in May 2017, the same month as her sister's, at St. Mark's Church in Englefield, was everything you'd expect from the sister of a future queen. It was a private event, technically, but everything from the £40,000 Giles Deacon wedding dress to the custom glass marquee erected on her parents' property screamed royalty. Prince George and Princess Charlotte served as page boy and flower girl. The guest list was a who's who of British high society. It wasn't a royal wedding, but it may as well have been. To the public, it looked perfect. Here was Pippa, poised, radiant, stepping into a new chapter with the kind of grace that had defined her public image for years. And here was James, solid, successful, and seemingly content to let his wife have the spotlight. But under the surface, cracks were already forming that we didn't have a clue about. While they may have looked aligned, James and Pippa came from two different emotional worlds. James was deeply private, almost reclusive by celebrity standards. He didn't care for red carpets, press coverage, or fashion photographers. He preferred dinners at private clubs, business meetings, and weekends out of the public eye. Pippa, on the other hand, had lived with the spotlight for almost a decade. She had learned to navigate it, maybe not embrace it, but survive in it. She knew how to give short interviews, attend charity galas, and turn a street-style photo into a subtle brand moment. She didn't chase fame, but she understood the dance, or at least she learned how to. That difference between tolerating fame and withdrawing from it would quietly wedge itself between them. And while both may have believed that love would bridge the gap, love doesn't erase lifestyle. It doesn't erase comfort zones. And in time, those differences would stop being charming and start becoming exhausting. The wedding may have looked like the start of a fairy tale, but for Pippa and James, it was also the start of a delicate balancing act, one that neither of them realized would be impossible to maintain. Behind the walls of their lavish $17 million West London townhouse, the glamour began to wear thin. To outsiders, Pippa Middleton and James Matthews seemed to be settling into the perfect post-wedding chapter. A beautiful home, a growing family, appearances at Wimbledon, charity events, and society parties. But those who knew them, or watched closely, started noticing subtle but telling shifts. For one, their public dynamic changed. In the first year of marriage, they often appeared together at events. But over time, Pippa began arriving solo, at galas, at tennis matches, even at family functions where spouses were expected to be side by side. James, once visible, if only reluctantly, began fading from view. And Pippa? She adjusted, at first. She pulled back from interviews, attended fewer events, kept a lower profile, just as James preferred. But that kind of self-editing comes with a cost. For a woman who had spent years learning how to survive under the camera's gaze, how to control her narrative, it felt like shrinking. Her style changed, too. Gone were the bold colors and head-turning styles that she used to rock elegantly. Slowly, her wardrobe shifted to neutrals, conservative cuts, safe choices. While some still saw her new style as elegant, others saw it as a quiet retreat. Her light wasn't gone, but it was dimming, and people noticed. Blogs and gossip mills began whispering about the growing disconnect. Not fights, not scandals, just distance. Because while James built his life around quiet routines, Pippa still found joy in being part of the social circuit. She might not have fancied the celebrity life, but she liked connecting, contributing, and being seen. Her background in PR and event planning wasn't just a job, it was a part of her personality. But James? He found comfort in silence, in predictability, in not having to perform. They weren't opposites who balanced each other. They were increasingly two people orbiting different planets. One of the most telling shifts came when Pippa was spotted at a family's Christmas event without her wedding ring. It was subtle, easy to overlook. But longtime royal watchers and fashion sleuths clocked it immediately. The images circulated, questions followed, but no answers came. And that was the pattern. No public fights, no big headlines, just a slow unraveling behind closed doors. A silence that felt heavier than any tabloid rumor.
But I think that the nature of Twitter and Facebook, people, even if they spot me, will just say they've just seen me somewhere, and particularly in a restaurant, that sort of could be the worst, because if someone tweets in a restaurant, then a photographer could turn up at the restaurant, and suddenly my private dinner is not so private.
By now, the absence was impossible to ignore. The couple who once graced events together, posed politely for photographers, and projected stability had seemingly vanished from the public eye. Pippa still showed up, always polished, always composed. But James? He became a ghost in their narrative. At first, it was easy to chalk it up to preference. James was never one for the spotlight after all. But when even family-centric events like Kate Middleton's Christmas event began to pass without a glimpse of him, people started asking, where is James Matthews? There were no joint appearances at major charity galas, no shared photos at Wimbledon anymore, no images of hand-in-hand strolls through Chelsea like the early days. Instead, Pippa showed up alone. Again and again. The Kate Middleton event, where she decided not to wear her wedding band, felt intentional, almost like she wanted to pass a subtle message to the world in a bid to stop the questions without directly answering them. As expected, the message was received loud and clear. But the most interesting message of it all was the shift in energy anytime Pippa stepped out. Remember how we said her fashion choice changed after she got married? Well, fashion insiders noticed a different shift back to the styles she used to be adored for. The bright, playful pieces were back. The softened, confident edge seems to be leveling up again. While she used to look muted, at least for a few months after the whole wedding ring drama, her vibrancy seemed to be finding its way back to her. Still, there was no dramatic fallout, no social media explosion, no scathing headlines or teary interviews, just a growing awareness that something real had ended, quietly and with intent. And that's what made it so compelling. The fact that Pippa managed to contain the whole situation was quite intriguing. She had always been the picture of poise, and for that, she didn't lash out. She didn't sell her story. She let the silence speak for itself. And in doing so, she gave us a glimpse of what it really feels like when a marriage ends among partners from powerful families. Friends of the couple, speaking anonymously, hinted at what many suspected. They had grown apart, emotionally, socially, practically. Two people building two very different lives under the same roof, until eventually, they weren't. By the time whispers of divorce began to circulate, the audience, us, the public, had already seen it coming. Not because of a scandal, but because of everything that wasn't there anymore.
And I think people feel they can say something about you online or on a web page when they would never say it to your face, but they think that's okay.
Perfection looks beautiful on the outside, but living inside it, that's something else entirely. For over a decade, Pippa Middleton had been holding it all together, gracefully, quietly, and endlessly. She wasn't just the sister of a future queen. She was a wife, a mother of three, a public figure, a brand. Every move she makes is calculated. Every outfit is carefully chosen. Every appearance was weighed against expectations she never agreed to, but somehow inherited. And the expectations weren't just public, they were internal too. The Middleton family had always been high achievers. Carol and Michael raised their children to be polished, driven, and self-sufficient. Kate became a princess. James Middleton built a business and battled depression publicly. But Pippa? She carried the unspoken task of being the one who could never stumble, the one who kept smiling, the one who could wear a white bridesmaid dress and steal the show without stealing attention. In many ways, she was caught between two worlds, one built on ambition, image, and perfect presentation. The other built on the desire for peace, family, and private joy. And somewhere along the line, she started slipping through the cracks. Behind closed doors, she wasn't just a woman in a distant marriage. She was a woman quietly collapsing under the weight of everyone else's version of who she was supposed to be. Friends reportedly described her as graceful and composed, but not many asked how she was doing behind the camera flashes. She had a husband who didn't want the spotlight, a family name tied to royalty, a public that expected her to smile, pose, and perform, and 3 children to raise in the middle of it all. It was never just about the marriage, it was about identity. Who was Pippa Middleton without the photos, without the royal surname connections, without James standing beside her? Who was she if she simply stopped performing? And slowly, She started to answer those questions, not in interviews, but in actions. She stepped back from the mainstream media almost completely. Her fashion also grew quieter, her appearances rarer than ever. And with every quiet move, she was making a bold decision: to stop chasing perfection and start chasing peace. Even though the public isn't entirely to blame for Pippa Middleton's failed relationships, there's no denying they played a role in it, no matter how small. If you're wondering how, let's break it down for you. You see, while Pippa was quietly trying to protect the fragile balance of her marriage, the world outside their home wasn't making it any easier. In 2022, she and James Matthews faced major backlash from a community you wouldn't expect: their neighbors. The controversy started with a public footpath that ran through the grounds of their sprawling £15 million estate in West Berkshire. For decades, locals had used the path for walks, runs, and family outings. But after purchasing the land, James and Pippa made a decision that changed everything. They blocked access. And to their surprise, it didn't take long for the backlash to begin. Residents were furious. Many saw the move as elitist and tone-deaf, another example of the wealthy cutting themselves off from the very communities they claimed to support. The couple argued it was about privacy and protecting their home. But to the people of Bucklebury, it felt like a betrayal. And for Pippa, who had once been known as the grounded, relatable Middleton sister, this was a turning point. The same public that had once adored her was now side-eyeing her from across a picket fence. And they didn't let her hear the end of it on social media. But that wasn't the only storm brewing. Around the same time, James Matthews hit a wall with a passion project he'd poured millions into: a countryside nursery school at Bucklebury Farm, a property he co-owned near Pippa's childhood home. The idea was to create a high-end educational space immersed in nature. But the plan fell apart. Local officials recommended denying the application due to concerns about sustainability and traffic congestion. The rejection was a quiet one, but it was a blow nonetheless. One that added yet another layer of frustration and disappointment behind closed doors. To the public, these stories may have felt small, but inside a household already dealing with emotional distance, they echoed something deeper. A life slowly coming apart at the seams. The estate fence and the failed nursery weren't the reasons Pippa's marriage cracked, obviously, but they symbolized everything that was going wrong. A widening gap between the life they wanted and the reality they were living. In the end, there was no announcement, no bitter statement, no social media post with a cryptic caption, just distance, stillness, and a woman who, for once, didn't feel the need to explain herself. Now, 41 years old, Pippa Middleton admitted the actual reason she divorced James Matthews, not in a televised sit-down, but in the way she stopped showing up for a version of life that wasn't really hers. She didn't need to slam the door or point fingers. Her silence spoke more loudly than any scandal ever could. For so long, Pippa's life had been built around keeping the image intact. The perfect sister, the perfect wife, the effortless style icon who always knew how to smile for the cameras. But what the world rarely saw was the weight of maintaining that illusion. The compromises, the emotional edits, the slow erasure of self. And when she finally chose to step away, she did it the way she had lived, gracefully, deliberately, and entirely on her own terms. Pippa Middleton may never publicly spell out why her marriage failed. She may never confirm the divorce in black and white. But everything about her recent choices says it already. So the next time you see a photo of Pippa walking into an event alone, not smiling for the cameras, not wearing the ring, not playing the part. Don't assume she lost anything. Assume she found something instead: herself.